The smell of truffle butter and roasted lamb filled the air, thick with pretension. My mother sat at the head of the long mahogany table, her posture perfect, her smile polished for the guests. I sat near the edge, half hidden behind a tall candle holder, watching my siblings soak in the glow of her approval. They were her stars shining, perfect and loud. I was the quiet one, the afterthought who somehow got invited to their little victory parade. That wasn't supposed to sting anymore. But it did. I could hear every comparison laced between her compliments. David just got promoted again, she said proudly. And of course, and is moving into her new condo, such a smart investment. Her voice carried the same pride she used to reserve for church announcements, the kind that made strangers envious. When her gaze finally drifted to me, it wasn't pride I saw, it was mild annoyance, like I'd somehow interrupted the performance. I smiled anyway. That's what I'd always done, pretend her indifference didn't hurt, pretend I was fine with being the forgotten daughter. But something about the laughter around that table, the clinking glasses, the glances exchanged over my silence made my stomach twist. It was like I wasn't even there, just a ghost haunting a memory that wasn't mine anymore. So, what about you? My brother finally asked, probably out of politeness more than curiosity. Still at that shop of yours, he said. Shop like it was a disease. It's going well, I said softly. Actually, we just reached our best quarter yet. Mom's fork paused midair. She tilted her head slightly, the way she did when she was about to turn kindness into cruelty. That's nice, dear, but you can't really compare selling trinkets online to actual careers. She laughed lightly, a rehearsed sound that drew chuckles from the others. I wanted to disappear, but something in me, the part that had been quietly collecting every wound for years, shifted. I forced a smile, trying to ease the tension. I guess we all succeed in our own way. Mom's smile vanished. Success, she repeated, as if the word itself was an insult coming from my mouth. Then, in one smooth motion, she pointed her manicured finger directly at me. You don't deserve a seat at this table. The words didn't echo, they detonated. It wasn't loud, but the silence that followed was unbearable. My chest tightened. For a second, I thought I misheard her. The waiter froze mid-step. My sister bit her lip to hide a smirk. I blinked, forcing back tears that threatened to expose the weakness she'd always accused me of. My hands trembled under the tablecloth. I'd spent years wishing for her approval, and in one sentence, she confirmed what I'd always known. I was never part of this family's story. I could have stood up and walked away quietly. That's what the old me would have done, swallow the pain, cry in my car, promise myself I'd get used to it someday. But something inside me, something raw and tired, refused to shrink this time. I stood slowly, the chair scraping against the marble floor with a sound that made everyone flinch. My heart pounded, but my voice came out steady, calm, deadly calm. Then stop eating. Mom's face froze, color draining from her cheeks. My siblings stopped breathing. The air in the room shifted sharp, electric. For once, all their eyes were on me, not with pity, but shock. I didn't wait for her response. I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. I reached for my purse, placed my napkin neatly on the table, and turned away. The waiter, poor soul, moved aside nervously as I passed. I could feel their stares burning into my back. The woman they dismissed, the daughter they laughed at leaving the table she was never meant to sit at. As I walked toward the door, I caught my reflection in the restaurant's mirrored wall. My face looked unfamiliar, stronger, almost peaceful. Maybe it was because I finally understood something. You can't beg for a place at a table built on disrespect. You walk away and build your own. Outside, the city lights blurred through tears I refused to let fall. My phone buzzed with a message from my brother, probably a half-hearted apology or another joke, but I didn't check. I didn't need to. For the first time, I wasn't craving their validation. I was free of it. What none of them knew, and what they would soon learn, is that walking away wasn't the end. It was the beginning of everything they'd never expect me to become. When I think back to my childhood, it's strange how silence has a sound. It lived in my room, a quiet, aching hum that filled the spaces between laughter drifting down the hallway. My mother's laughter, sharp and bright, mixed with the voices of my brother and sister. They were her chosen ones, the stars she hung her dreams on. I was just the shadow that followed behind, too quiet to be noticed, too different to be loved loudly. I remember sitting cross-legged on the floor, coloring in the edges of a drawing I had made for her birthday. It was messy, but I had stayed up all night perfecting it. I imagined the smile on her face when she'd see it. The next morning, I left it on her dresser, right beside her perfume bottles. She never mentioned it. Later that night, I found it in the trash, stained with foundation powder. That was how love looked in our house. Selective, conditional, something you earned by being impressive enough to display. Mom used to clap for my brother when he kicked a ball straight, beam when my sister recited 2 lines of a school poem. But when I came home with first place in our class, she just said, "That's nice," without looking up from her phone. I learned early that effort didn't matter. It wasn't her kind of achievement. Meals were another stage for her affection. The 3 of them left at the table while I sat quietly, waiting to be included. My brother would retell his soccer victories, and my sister would dramatize her school projects like she was giving a press conference. Mom loved every second. She'd say, "I'm so proud of you both," in that honeyed tone that never once extended in my direction. I used to wonder if she even noticed the empty chair beside me, or if, in her eyes, I was the one who made the table uneven. Once, I tried to join in. I mentioned a book I was reading, my voice small but hopeful. She didn't even glance at me. "You talk too much about things that don't matter," she said, laughing lightly, before turning back to my sister. Everyone else laughed too. I smiled along, pretending it was funny. Inside, something small cracked. Those moments didn't just fade. They built walls, invisible ones that separated me from them long before I realized it. I became the quiet observer, the one who watched life from the corners. When guests visited, Mom introduced my siblings with pride and me as an afterthought. "Oh, and that's my youngest," she'd say, as if remembering an item left off a grocery list. I started spending more time in my room, my safe place. I'd listen to the faint echoes of laughter from the living room and imagine being part of it. Sometimes I'd press my ear to the wall, not out of jealousy, but out of longing. I wanted to belong to that sound. I wanted to be seen. But the more invisible I became, the quieter I got. Teachers at school called me the polite one, the quiet one, as if those were compliments. I guess they were. Silence was safe. Silence didn't get rejected. Still, I kept trying. I'd cook her breakfast on Mother's Day, only to hear her praise my sister for bringing flowers. I'd clean the kitchen spotless, and she'd tell my brother how helpful he was for taking out 1 bag of trash. Every time, it chipped away at something inside me. The belief that love could be earned if I just did enough. One night, when I was about 13, I sat by the window and whispered to myself, "Maybe I'm just not the kind of daughter she wants." Saying it out loud made it real, but it also made it hurt less. It was easier to think I was the problem than to believe my own mother couldn't love me the way I needed. I carried the thought like a secret through the years, that I was meant to stay unseen, unheard, uncelebrated. I learned to smile through indifference, to hide the sting behind politeness. I didn't realize then that the pain of being invisible doesn't fade. It evolves. It becomes something else. A quiet determination. A vow whispered to yourself that one day they'll see you. And when they do, they'll wish they hadn't looked away for so long. Adulthood didn't erase the ache. It only disguised it under long hours, polite smiles, and the illusion that effort could fix everything. I worked jobs after college, scraping by while my siblings climbed ladders built for them. Mom bragged about their promotions, their vacations, their smart choices. When it came to me, she'd sigh and say, "She's trying her best," in that tone that made trying sound like failure. I told myself that love could still be earned if I just kept showing up, if I proved I wasn't the disappointment she believed. I was. So I kept attending every family gathering, every birthday dinner, no matter how small I felt in their presence. That night, Dad's birthday, I remember holding the gift in my lap the whole drive there. It wasn't expensive. A leather wallet I'd saved up for, engraved with his initials. Simple, thoughtful, within my means. I wrapped it carefully in plain paper with a ribbon I found at work. I wasn't proud of the price tag, but I was proud of the sentiment. It was love I could afford. The restaurant was one of those places where the napkins were folded like sculptures and the menu had no prices. My siblings arrived in designer clothes, perfume thick in the air. I sat quietly across from Mom, trying not to fidget. She looked me over, her eyes landing on my thrifted dress. "You didn't dress up?" she asked, her lips barely curving. Before I could answer, my sister chimed in. "Oh, Mom, she's being practical. It's her thing." They laughed. I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides survival behind it. When dinner ended, we started exchanging gifts. My brother handed Dad a shiny smartwatch. My sister gave him a custom golf set. Their gifts earned applause, clinking glasses, laughter. Then it was my turn. My hands trembled a little as I slid the wrapped box across the table. "Happy birthday, Dad," I said softly. He smiled, kind as always. But before he could even touch it, Mom leaned forward. "A wallet," she said loudly. How original. The sarcasm dripped like poison in water. Everyone froze for half a beat before my sister laughed under her breath. Mom wasn't finished. "You know, maybe one day, when you can afford more than gas station gifts, you'll understand how to give properly." The table went silent, except for the clink of her fork against her plate. My father shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't speak. My brother avoided my eyes. My sister looked amused. I wanted to disappear. My face burned, and I felt the sting of tears rising, but I forced them back. Crying in front of her would mean losing again. I looked down at my hands, at the cheap nail polish I had applied in the bathroom mirror before leaving. It hit me then, no matter what I did, she'd never see me as enough. I managed a small laugh, though it came out cracked. "It's not much," I said quietly, "but I thought it'd be useful." Mom leaned back, smiling that cold, polished smile. "Well, darling, maybe usefulness isn't everything. Some of us like things that make a statement." Her words landed like blows I'd heard before, just dressed in finer clothing. I nodded, pretending to agree, and reached for my water. My hand shook, and the glass trembled against the table. Dad finally spoke, gently. "It's a nice gift, sweetheart." But even his voice sounded apologetic, as if he was trying to patch a wound already too deep. The rest of the evening blurred. Laughter resumed, forced and hollow. I smiled when required, spoke only when spoken to. Something inside me began to shift. Not a sharp snap, but a slow fracture that had been forming for years. When I left the restaurant, I sat in my car for a long time before turning the key. The city lights reflected on the windshield, blurring with my tears. I had spent my whole life trying to earn a seat at that table, to be good enough, polished enough, lovable enough. But that night, I finally understood something brutal and liberating. That love had conditions I could never meet. That realization didn't come with rage. It came with silence, the same silence I grew up with, but heavier now. Something had broken, yes, but it wasn't weakness this time. It was the illusion that their approval mattered. And once that illusion shattered, the pieces inside me began to rearrange into something else. Something stronger, something waiting. After that birthday dinner, I began to move through my days differently. The same job, the same apartment, the same tired routines. But inside, something subtle had changed. For the first time, I stopped measuring my worth by their applause. It was terrifying, at first, realizing how much of my identity was built around people who never truly saw me. The truth was, my life had more depth than any of them could imagine. For years, I'd been quietly running a small online shop, hand-painted stationery, custom journal covers, personalized planners. It started as a hobby to stay sane after long work shifts, but it grew slowly, then steadily. I learned digital marketing from YouTube tutorials, managed orders at night, and reinvested every cent I could. I wasn't rich, not by their standards. No yachts, no luxury handbags, no expensive getaways. But I had something better: stability, a modest savings account, a growing customer base, and an investment portfolio I built by reading finance blogs at 2 a.m. while they laughed at cocktail parties. Every dollar I earned was mine, untouched by anyone's judgment or manipulation that no one in my family knew. Part of me kept its secret out of fear, the same fear that had followed me since childhood. I imagined Mom's smirk if she found out. How cute, our little entrepreneur. I could already hear the mockery in her voice. So I hid my success like a fragile seed still too young to face the wind. One evening, while packing orders at my kitchen table, my best friend Leah called. She had seen my quiet persistence through every humiliation. "You know," she said, "you're the only person I know who doesn't realize how far she's come." I laughed, brushing it off. "It's nothing, just a side thing." Leah didn't let me. "No, it's not nothing. You built something out of the scraps they left you. Stop shrinking so they can stay comfortable." Her words hit deeper than I expected. I sat there, surrounded by stacks of journals and shipping boxes, feeling a warmth bloom inside my chest. Pride, unfamiliar and shy at first. For years, I'd been minimizing myself just to fit the version of me my family accepted. The quiet, grateful, trying her best daughter. But Lear was right. I had built something. Quietly, yes, but with my own hands, my own mind. Every small victory had been mine alone, earned in silence. I started looking at my life differently after that. My apartment, once a symbol of modesty, now felt like proof of independence. My routines, once dull, became rituals of growth. The next time I checked my business dashboard, I noticed I'd crossed a milestone. 10,000 sales. I stared at the number, hardly believing it. I thought about all the nights I stayed up fighting off tears and fatigue. All the days I smiled through their dismissiveness. It hadn't been for nothing. For the first time, I didn't feel like the invisible daughter. I felt like the quiet storm they never saw coming. Still, a part of me wasn't ready to confront them. Not yet. I wanted to protect this piece I'd built. The soft kind that comes when you stop begging for validation. I wasn't seeking revenge then, not consciously. What I wanted was space, to grow roots without someone stepping on them. But life has a way of bringing buried things to light. My transformation didn't come in grand gestures or sudden epiphanies. It came in whispers, small choices, subtle changes, saying no more often, dressing for myself, not for their approval, speaking with a steadier voice. It wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about proving to myself that I never needed their permission to exist fully. That realization was the beginning of something new, a quiet awakening that would, soon enough, collide with the world I tried to leave behind. It came on a Thursday evening, wrapped in sugar-coated politeness. Mom's name lit up my phone, and for a moment, I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken much since Dad's birthday. Short, surface-level texts, polite updates that meant nothing. But something in me was curious. Maybe part of me still needed to hear what game she'd play next. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice dripping with exaggerated warmth. "We're having a little dinner for your brother this weekend. His promotion. You'll come, won't you?" Her tone wasn't a question. It was a test, the kind she always gave, hidden behind smiles. I could almost see her sitting in her pristine kitchen, manicure perfect, eyes gleaming at the thought of another performance. And me, the reluctant extra in her show. For a moment, I thought about saying no. I had every reason to, but something held me back. Not fear, not guilt. Something steadier. I wanted to see them again, to face them without the old ache weighing me down, not to beg for space at their table, but to observe it, like a scene I no longer belonged to. "Sure, Mom," I said. My voice sounded calm, even to my own ears. "I'll be there." There was a pause on the line, just long enough for her to register that I hadn't hesitated. "Good," she finally said. "Wear something nice this time." When she hung up, I stared at the screen, her words echoing in my head. Wear something nice. The old me would have spent days worrying about that. rummaging through thrift stores, second-guessing every outfit. But not now. I didn't need their approval to look like I belonged. That weekend, I got ready with quiet purpose. No expensive brands, no pretense. Just a simple black dress that fit well, a pair of pearl earrings Leah had given me, and a confidence that didn't need permission to exist. As I drove to the restaurant, memories flooded in. Every dinner that had left me hollow, every joke at my expense disguised as family humor. I had walked into those rooms carrying invisible chains, desperate to prove I was enough. But tonight, I wasn't that girl anymore. When I arrived, I saw them through the glass before stepping inside. Mom in her glittering blazer, my brother mid-laugh, my sister scrolling on her phone. They looked exactly the same, frozen in their own hierarchy. And for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt distant, like watching a familiar movie I'd outgrown. "Look who decided to show up," my sister said as I approached, smirking. "Of course she did," Mom added smoothly. "Family's important, isn't it, dear?" I smiled politely, taking my seat. "Absolutely." Mom's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she couldn't quite place the difference in my tone. The evening unfolded like every other. The bragging, the subtle digs, the laughter that wasn't meant for me. But this time, their words slid off me like water. I wasn't there to defend myself anymore. I was there to see clearly, to finally recognize the small, cruel theater I had once mistaken for love, somewhere between the appetizers and the main course. Mom leaned in and said sweetly, "You're quiet tonight. Everything all right?" I met her gaze and smiled. "Perfect." Actually, her smile faltered for just a second. I noticed, and that second was worth more than all the approval I'd ever chased. The night went on, but something had shifted. They didn't know it yet, but I wasn't playing their game anymore. I was just waiting to end it. The restaurant was new, one of those sleek, modern places where the lighting was dim enough to make everyone look important. Mom had chosen it, of course. She loved anywhere she could be seen without being approached, admired without having to share space. I arrived 5 minutes early and waited in my car, studying my breath. I wasn't nervous, not exactly, just aware. When I finally stepped inside, I immediately noticed she hadn't just invited family this time. There were others at the table, her friends, which usually meant people she wanted to impress. A woman with diamond earrings, a man with a gold watch, another couple with that effortless, expensive kind of posture. They all looked at me with the same polite curiosity reserved for outsiders. "There she is," Mom announced as I approached, her voice a performance dressed as affection. "My daughter finally made it." She motioned to an empty seat at the far end of the table, conveniently away from her. I sat down, smiling faintly. The air smelled of wine and power, the kind of dinner where image was the main course. They were already talking about my brother's promotion. He was moving to a bigger office, managing more people, making real money, as Mom put it. I listened quietly as they clinked glasses in his honor. She glowed beside him, her pride radiant and sharp. Then, inevitably, her attention drifted toward me. "And how's our little dreamer?" she asked, the word dreamer laced with dismissal. "Still figuring things out." The table chuckled softly, a polite echo of her mockery. I looked at her, calm. "Still working," I said. "Things are going well." "Working," she repeated, like it was a foreign word. "You've been working forever, haven't you?" Her friend smiled awkwardly. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice just enough for it to sting. "You know, I always told her she had potential. If only she had a little more ambition." The old me would have flushed red, stumbled to defend myself, maybe even apologized. But tonight, I just watched her. She wanted a reaction, the same old dynamic of humiliation and silence. Only this time, I wasn't silent because I was broken. I was silent because I was done. She went on, her voice sugar-coated and cruel. "I mean, look at her. She's always been so simple, comfortable with the bare minimum. I suppose not everyone's meant for big things." Laughter rippled softly around the table, thin and uncomfortable. My brother looked down at his plate, pretending to check his phone. My sister smirked. The conversation moved on. But Mom wasn't finished. A little later, she glanced at my dress, plain, black, modest. You know, darling, she said, you could at least add a little color next time. Something cheerful. You look like you're attending a funeral. Her friends laughed again, eager to please. I smiled back, not forced, but real, quiet, contained, dangerous. You're right, I said softly. I suppose I am. Some things just needed to be laid to rest. She blinked, confused, unsure if it was an insult. The silence that followed was subtle and heavy. For the first time, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not power, but uncertainty. As the evening dragged on, I watched her from a distance, studying her like a stranger. Every exaggerated laugh, every glance toward her friends for validation. I realized that all her cruelty came from fear of being unseen, of losing control. It wasn't me she hated, it was what I represented, a life outside her stage. When dessert came, she leaned close again, lowering her tone. You've changed, she said, suspicion curling in her voice. I looked at her, calm and steady. Maybe you're just seeing me clearly for the first time. Her smile tightened. Don't get dramatic, she muttered, straightening her napkin. But I could feel it. The shift in the air, the tiny fracture in her composure. The rest of the dinner blurred into meaningless chatter. They spoke of business trips, new cars, promotions. I said little, smiled when it was polite, and let them talk. Inside, I felt something I never felt at one of these dinners before, peace. Because I knew something they didn't. Behind their laughter and expensive smells, their validation was all they had. Mine came from somewhere quieter, steadier, unshakable. When the bill came, Mom reached for it theatrically, making a show of generosity. Of course, I'll handle it, she said. My successful children deserve a treat. I rose before she could finish. I've already paid for my part, I said evenly. You can handle the rest. She looked at me, startled, a flash of disbelief crossing her face. The woman who once controlled every seat at her table suddenly realized I didn't need one anymore. I thanked everyone, excused myself, and walked out into the night. The air was cool, sharp with freedom. Behind me, laughter continued. Hello, rehearsed. But as the door closed, I knew I had finally left that table in every way that mattered. Words hit me like a whip, sharp and deliberate, delivered with the precision of someone who had practiced cruelty for decades. You don't deserve a seat at this table. Mom's voice was smooth, polished, deadly in its casual venom. For a moment, I froze, caught in the flash of all the years she had made me feel small, unworthy, invisible. Laughter erupted around me, light, rehearsed, the kind that feeds on humiliation. My siblings grinned at her side, basking in the glow of being chosen. Guests shifted in their chairs, exchanging polite chuckles, unsure of whether to feel sympathy or amusement. And I sat there, feeling the familiar sting, the old ache that had chased me through childhood and adulthood alike. For a fraction of a second, I thought about saying nothing. The old me would have swallowed the words, smiled, nodded, and walked away silently, curling myself smaller until I disappeared. But this time, the calm inside me was different, deliberate, measured. Years of quiet accumulation, of building a life beyond their judgment, had crystallized into something sharp and unshakable. I looked directly at her. Her expression, confident and poised 1 second, faltered as she realized my eyes no longer trembled under her scrutiny. My voice was steady, cold, deliberate, every syllable exact. Then stop eating. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Glasses paused midair. Forks hovered above plates. The laughter froze, strangled in the throe of disbelief. Mom's smile wavered, a flicker of uncertainty passing across her face for the first time in years. She tried to recover, to mask it with a cough and a stiff impostor. But the moment had passed. Her control shattered in a single, simple sentence. I stood, slow and deliberate, feeling every inch of dignity I had cultivated rise up to meet the room. No tremor, no apology, no hint of shame, just clarity. I gathered my napkin, placed it neatly on the table, and moved toward the exit, each step steady, measured, and stoppable. The room held its collective breath as I walked past them, past the stunned faces of my siblings, past the murmurs of her guests. I didn't turn back. I didn't gloat. Anger had nothing to do with it. This was pure, unshakable empowerment, the calm force of someone who had been underestimated for decades finally asserting their worth. Outside, the air hit me like liberation. The noise of the restaurant faded behind me, replaced by the quiet clarity of my own mind. I didn't need their validation, their approval, or their recognition. I had already claimed my worth in silence, in private victories, in the slow, steady accumulation of everything they had refused to see. For the first time, walking away didn't feel like defeat. It felt like victory. Every step I took was a statement. I was more than their judgment, more than their dismissals, more than the sum of their expectations. I had my own life, my own success, my own dignity. And behind me, I could almost hear the faint shiver of their disbelief, the tiny crack in their perfect little performance. For once, I was the one in control, calm, composed, untouchable. I reached my car, breathing in the night air, the cool wind filling my lungs with a quiet, victorious clarity. They had expected me to falter, to break, to beg silently for a place at their table. Instead, I had simply stood, and in standing, I had made them small. I didn't need to watch them squirm. I didn't need to shout or punish. My dignity, my composure, my silent assertion of self-worth was punishment enough. The years of being overlooked, belittled, and dismissed had culminated in this single, quiet act, and it carried a weight heavier than any argument, louder than any scream, sharper than any insult. I got into my car, closed the door softly, and sat for a moment, letting the night embrace me. I was free, I was whole, and for the first time, I realized something vital. Walking away doesn't mean giving up. Sometimes, walking away means winning entirely. Weeks passed, and I stayed silent. No calls, no texts, no polite check-ins. The phones in their hands grew heavier with unanswered messages. Mom's voice, once sharp and mocking, began to falter in tone when she spoke to others. She wasn't laughing anymore. Instead, there was curiosity, a faint edge of concern creeping into her words. Whenever my name was mentioned, she'd ask my siblings, carefully, almost as if testing their knowledge, "Have you heard from her lately? Is she well?" Meanwhile, I poured myself into my life, quietly, deliberately. My business, once modest and hidden, continued to grow. The orders kept coming, each one a small validation of the work I had nurtured in silence. I expanded into new products, listened to customers, learned every nuance of what they wanted before they even knew themselves. I wasn't building for applause. I was building for me. Then came the turning point. A well-known investor, impressed by the steady growth and authenticity of my brand, offered to buy a significant stake. The deal transformed my small, humble shop into a national presence. Suddenly, I was no longer invisible. My name appeared in newsletters, on social media, in small business journals. People admired the quiet diligence that had been my secret for so long. I sat in my tiny office the night the contract was signed, staring at the figures on my screen. My hand shook with a mix of disbelief and triumph. For decades, I had chased approval, yearned for acknowledgement from people who had never truly seen me. Now, recognition came unsolicited, earned entirely on my terms. The first thing I did with my new wealth wasn't extravagant cars or flashy jewelry. It was something almost ironic. I purchased a house, a beautiful, modestly grand home with sunlit rooms and a garden large enough to lose myself in. The same style, the same neighborhood, even the same streets my parents had once aspired to live in before debt and poor choices forced them to leave it behind. I drove past their old neighborhood, seeing the house that once symbolized their pride, and smiled softly, not out of malice, but for poetic justice. Life had a way of balancing itself quietly. Through all of this, I never contacted them. No calls, no messages. I wanted them to witness it in their own way, to feel the curiosity, the speculation, the gnawing realization that I had succeeded entirely without their approval, that I had not only survived their dismissal, but had flourished while remaining utterly independent. My mornings were filled with light and purpose, not expectation. I spent weekends tending to the garden, walking the dog, sipping coffee by the sunlit window. I made decisions freely, purchased things for myself, traveled when I wanted, all without a single thought of what they would say or think. Sometimes, a pang of memory would surface, a dinner table, a dismissive remark, a childhood tear, but these were no longer wounds. They were reminders of the strength I had forged quietly. Every insult, every humiliation had contributed to the foundation upon which I now stood, strong, calm, and unassailable. When news reached Mom through friends or subtle gossip about my business, she reacted the way she always had, in stages. First disbelief, then curiosity, then an almost imperceptible dread. I imagined her wondering, how did she? And that, more than anything, was satisfying. Success, I realized, didn't need to be loud to be complete. There was a profound pleasure in the silence, in knowing that I had won without confrontation, without drama. I had achieved what they had never believed I could. And I did it quietly, deliberately, without ever asking for permission. In my new home, with the sun streaming across polished wooden floors and the scent of fresh flowers in the air, I finally allowed myself to reflect. The humiliation, the neglect, the endless striving for their approval, it had all led me here. And here, I was untouchable, not through anger or revenge in the traditional sense, but through the quiet, unstoppable accumulation of my own worth. This was my victory. My life, built in silence, was louder than any insult they could ever throw. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to prove anything directly. The truth was in every brick of the house, every dollar in the bank, every smile of contentment that filled my days. And for the first time in my life, I felt utterly free. A few weeks later, I was flipping through a local magazine at a cafe when I froze. There I was, my smiling face on the glossy cover, beneath the headline, "From Hobby to Empire, How She Built a Business Against All Odds." My heart swelled with a quiet pride I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. For decades, I had waited for acknowledgement from the people who should have celebrated me first. Now, recognition came from strangers, from a world that didn't know my childhood scars, yet saw my worth clearly. The irony wasn't lost on me. Within days, calls started reaching Mom. Family, friends, impressed by the feature, were phoning to offer congratulations. "Your daughter is remarkable," they'd say, and she would respond with carefully practiced pride. "Oh, yes, yes. I always believed in her." I could almost hear her voice as I sipped my coffee, every syllable stiff with effort, every word a mask she wore to hide what she truly felt. Embarrassment, maybe even a twinge of guilt. The woman who had mocked me for never having ambition was now playing the part of the supportive mother she had never been. She invited these friends to lunches, dropping my name repeatedly, subtly steering the conversation toward my success. It was performative, transparent, and deliciously ironic. She had spent decades undermining me, and now she had to take credit for the very life she tried to belittle. I didn't intervene. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't need to. The poetry of it was perfect. The world now saw my accomplishments, while she pretended she had planted the seeds. Every call, every compliment she fielded, reminded me how far I had come. My siblings began asking questions too. "Did you really build all that yourself?" my sister asked during a rare text exchange. I replied simply, "Yes, every bit." The pause on the other end felt like 1,000 words, a silent acknowledgement of her underestimation. The city buzzed with my name quietly. Customers mentioned the magazine. New clients signed contracts, and invitations to speak at small events trickled in. I was living a life of legitimacy, independence, and visibility, all without their applause. Yet what I cherished most wasn't fame or recognition. It was the private satisfaction, the quiet triumph that came from knowing the truth. I had created a reality where I no longer needed their validation. But the universe had ensured that my success forced them to confront it anyway. The hypocrisy was palpable, and I savored it without malice. Every polite phone call she returned, every story she told with careful emphasis on how she always knew I'd succeed, was a reminder that she had never seen me. Not truly. Not until the world made her notice. And in that subtle, ironic victory, I felt the sweetest satisfaction of all. I had finally outgrown the table where I was never welcome, and the world, not just my family, had taken note. A few weeks after the magazine feature, my phone rang. Mom's name appeared on the screen, and for a fleeting moment, I hesitated. When I answered, her voice was different, not the practiced sweetness I had come to expect, but something tighter. Hesitant. "Hi, I was wondering if you'd come home for dinner this weekend," she said, almost stumbling over her words. "It's just family. We'd love to see you." I felt a small, private smile curve across my lips. For decades, her invitations had been tests, traps disguised as warmth. But now the game had shifted, and I was no longer playing by her rules. "Sure, I'll come," I said calmly. "I'd like that." Saturday evening arrived, and I drove to their house with steady resolve. The neighborhood looked the same, pristine and familiar. Inside, the scene mirrored the first dinner I had ever felt humiliated at. Polished table, silverware ranged precisely, the scent of roasted chicken and her favorite candles filling the air. My siblings lounged as if they owned the room, their smirks and whispered comments almost identical to before. Mom greeted me at the door with her usual smile, but there was a slight stiffness in her posture, a tension she couldn't hide. As I stepped into the dining room, the table looked smaller, the air heavier with expectation. I took my seat politely, letting the silence settle before speaking. Mom began her speech, her tone practiced and smug. "It's so wonderful that we can all be here together," she said, her eyes flicking toward me with the faintest trace of unease. I nodded, sipping my water. Waiting, dinner commenced in the usual rhythm. My brother and sister exchanged stories, boasting of their accomplishments, subtly highlighting the differences between them and me. But tonight, their glances carried uncertainty. They sensed a change they couldn't yet name. When Mom excused herself to retrieve the wine, I leaned forward slightly, setting my wallet beside my plate. Quietly, I took out my card and handed it to the server who had been hovering politely. "I'll cover the bill," I said, the words even, measured, leaving no room for negotiation. The effect was immediate. Mom froze mid-step, the smile that had masked her confidence faltering. My siblings' eyes widened, each glance betraying their discomfort. A flicker of panic passed across her face, thinly concealed behind a forced, polite laugh. "Oh, that's unnecessary," she said, her voice tight. "I insist," I replied calmly, letting the authority in my tone do the work. The server nodded and processed the payment, leaving me in quiet control of the situation. The table conversation continued, but the energy had shifted. Mom's words, once sharp and controlling, now hung weakly in the air, unable to cut. Every comment she made was measured against the unspoken fact that I was in charge here, financially and emotionally. The same room that had been a theater of humiliation was now a stage where I held the script. My siblings tried to regain composure, making jokes, forcing laughter. My brother leaned back, trying to appear casual, while my sister fiddled with her napkin, eyes darting toward me. Each of them sensed the reversal, the subtle but undeniable power I now carried. Mom, ever the performer, forced her smile, but it no longer reached her eyes. There was tension in the way she reached for her glass, in the slight tremor in her laugh. I could almost see her calculating, wondering how this had happened, how the quiet, overlooked child had returned not with confrontation, but with calm authority. I watched them closely, noting every flicker of discomfort, every small adjustment, every moment of hesitation was its own victory. I said nothing more, allowing the silence and the simple act of control to speak louder than words ever could. By the time dessert arrived, the table was subdued. I smiled politely, thanked everyone for the evening, and subtly reminded myself that the balance had shifted. For decades, I had been powerless, invisible, dismissed. Now, in the same room, under the same roof, I had quietly reclaimed the ground they had taken from me. And as we left the table, I knew it was no longer theirs to command. The evening had already settled into an awkward rhythm, the air thick with unspoken tension. Mom tried to maintain her composure, offering polite smiles that didn't reach her eyes. My siblings continued their small jabs, subtle reminders that nothing had changed. At least, that was their hope. I sipped my water calmly, listening, letting the conversation flow around me without interruption. Inside, I was aware of every glance, every twitch, every forced laugh. The quiet power I held had shifted the energy in the room, and it was only a matter of time before it rippled outward. Midway through dinner, a family friend, someone Mom had invited to witness her cultivated domestic theater, leaned across the table toward me. His eyes sparkled with genuine warmth, and he smiled in a way that made everyone at the table pause. "I just wanted to thank you," he said, voice low but deliberate, "for sponsoring the new scholarship in Mrs. Mom's last name as honor. It's already helped so many kids pursue college who wouldn't have had the chance otherwise." The words landed like a stone in the still water of the dining room. Every fork paused mid-air. Conversations stuttered. Mom's face, once confident and imperious, froze into a mask of shock. Her eyes widened slightly, and her lips parted, searching for the words to respond. But nothing came. "Wait," my brother whispered under his breath, confused, leaning forward. You did what?" I smiled lightly, the gesture polite but firm. "I thought it was important to honor family values in a way that makes a real difference," I said, voice calm, measured, almost gentle. The scholarship had been set up quietly weeks ago, long before the magazine feature, long before Mom had attempted to reclaim any semblance of control. She had been entirely unaware. Her mouth opened, then closed. A delicate, almost imperceptible tremor ran through her hands. My sister blinked rapidly, unsure where to look, while the guests at the table whispered quietly, exchanging glances. The elegance of the act was unmistakable, a public acknowledgement of Mom's supposed values, a celebration framed in her name. While she was left speechless, exposed without cruelty, shamed without confrontation, Mom's usual arsenal of practiced words, the clever deflections and gentle mockery, had failed her. She attempted a weak smile, a faint cough, but the moment had passed. The room had recognized something beyond her control. She was unable to reclaim authority, unable to spin this as a gesture she had orchestrated. And it stung, quietly, beautifully, irrevocably. I noticed her shift in posture, the slight tightness in her shoulders, the way she avoided my gaze. It was the first time in decades that her public image, meticulously curated over years, had been unsettled, and I didn't need to say another word. The scholarship, the genuine gratitude of the family friend, and the acknowledgement of the impact I had made spoke volumes louder than any argument or confrontation could have. I remained composed, letting the gentle triumph settle around me. There was no gloating, no smirk, just calm awareness, the kind that comes from knowing you've reclaimed your power quietly, elegantly, without stooping to cruelty. The room shifted perceptibly. The energy I had cultivated over months of silent work and deliberate victories filled the space with a gravity that Mom could neither control nor deflect. When the family friend excused himself, offering one last warm nod of gratitude, I noticed Mom finally speak, her voice low, careful, and strained. "Well, thank you," she said, the words hollow and polite. The forced acknowledgement was almost laughable. It hadn't carried such quiet humiliation. I offered her a soft nod in return, serene, untouchable, and tied from the need for her approval. By the time dessert was served, the air had shifted entirely. Mom's dominance had faltered. My siblings were subdued, and the guests, unaware of the full backstory, were subtly impressed by the composure and generosity of the quiet daughter who had suddenly become impossible to dismiss. The room no longer belonged to Mom. It belonged to the life I had built, the reputation I had earned, and the dignity I refused to relinquish. As the evening drew to a close, I rose, collected my coat, and allowed a quiet, knowing glance at the table. Mom's smile remained fixed, but it no longer carried command. The subtle, undeniable truth lingered. I had delivered justice not with anger, but with grace, not with confrontation, but with deliberate, elegant power. The scholarship, the grateful acknowledgement, and the calm assertion of my independence had spoken louder than any argument could. I stepped out into the night, letting the crisp air embrace me. I was victorious. My revenge had been quiet, tasteful, and complete, a reflection of every long night, every unseen effort, every moment of resilience that had led me to this moment. I didn't need applause or recognition. The satisfaction was mine, profound, lasting, and unshakable. The house was quiet once everyone had left, the echoes of polite conversation fading into the night. I lingered in the living room, sipping the last of my wine, when Mom appeared at the doorway. Her posture was uncertain, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes red-rimmed in a way that hinted she had been crying. I froze for a moment, the years of tension and anger colliding with something unfamiliar. Vulnerability. I owe you an apology, she said, her voice breaking, uneven. The carefully constructed mask of authority shattered. All those years, I was cruel. I didn't see you. I treated you unfairly. She swayed slightly, and I could sense the raw weight of regret pressing on her chest. I set my glass down and took a deep breath, letting the calm I had nurtured over months settle over me. For decades, I had chased validation from her, from them, from every table where I was made to feel small. But tonight, that pursuit had ended. My life, my dignity, my success, it had been earned without her approval, without her notice. And finally, the anger that had fueled me for so long had softened into quiet strength. I'm not angry anymore, I said gently, letting the words carry the weight of truth rather than resentment. I just stopped waiting to be invited. Her shoulders trembled, and tears slid down her cheeks. She tried to compose herself, but the cracks were irreparable. I don't deserve your forgiveness, she whispered. I was wrong in every way. I stepped closer, my hand brushing hers, not in pity, but in acknowledgement. You don't need to be forgiven for me to move on, I said softly. I've learned to value myself, and that's enough. For the first time in my life, I saw her not as a tyrant, not as a judge of my worth, but as a flawed human being. The years of hurt, humiliation,